Hi, it's time for story time with Miss Kelly. This is the second of our summer reading, and again, we're going to stick with an animal theme. And if you hang on just a minute, I will show you the cover. We're going to be reading The Velveteen Rabbit. There once was a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged up on top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges, and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was quite the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of it all, looking at the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being the only one made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas, and they pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was quite out of date and should never be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by disabled soldiers, should have had a broader view and put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them, all the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and common, and the only person who was kind to him was Skin Horse. There's the Christmas bunny again. And let's get to see what the Skin Horse looks like. There we go. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs on his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away, and he knew that they were only toys, and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very special and wonderful, and only playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the Skin Horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, while they were lying side by side near the nursery, before Nana came to tidy up the room.
Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?
Real isn't how you're made, said the Skin Horse. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real.
Does it hurt?
Asked the rabbit.
Sometimes,
said the Skin Horse, for he was always very truthful. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt.
Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?
He asked.
Or bit by bit?
It doesn't happen all at once, said the Skin Horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out of their place and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to the people who don't understand.
I suppose you're real,
said the rabbit, and he wished he had not said that, for he thought the Skin Horse might be a little sensitive. But the Skin Horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real. That is a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like, and yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished he could become it without being uncomfortable and having all these things happen to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes for no reason she went around swooping up like a great wind and hustled them away in the cupboards. She called it tidying up, and all the playthings hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind so much, for whenever he was thrown down, he came down soft. One evening when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog, D-O-G, dog, that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop.
"Here," she said, "take this old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you tonight."
And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him in the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. And he missed, too, those long talks and moonlight hours in the nursery when all the house was silent and his talks with Skin Horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and make nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes, and he said they were burrows like the real rabbits lived in. And they had splendid games together in whispers when Nana had gone away to her supper and left the nightlight burning on the mantelpiece. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close round him like all night. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed it. Well, sometimes becoming real takes a little time, and it kind of hurts a little. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden. For wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out for tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come home and look for him with the candle because the boy could not go to sleep without the rabbit. He was wet through with dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she rubbed off the dirt from the corner of her apron. "You must have this old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hand. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no longer a toy. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. And into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty, so that even Nana noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and said, "I declare if that bunny hasn't gotten quite a knowing expression." That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood. And in the long June evenings, the boy liked to go there after tea to play. He took the Velveteen rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play in the brigance among the trees, he always made the little rabbit a nest somewhere along the bracken, where he would be quite cozy, for he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked his bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants run to and fro between his velvet paws on the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall bracken nearby. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a queer way when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side of the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people would generally have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all of their noses twitched. "Why don't you come and play with us?" they asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain how he had no clockwork. "Ha!" said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can." He said.
I can. He said, I can jump as high as anything.
He meant when the boy threw him. But of course, he didn't want to say so. Can you hop on your hind legs? Asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the Velveteen rabbit had no hind legs. The back of him was made in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice.
I don't want to.
But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes. As this one stretched out his neck and looked, "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "Fancy a rabbit without any hind legs." And he began to laugh.
I have, said the little rabbit. I have got hind legs. I'm sitting on them.
Then stretch them out and show me, like this, said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl and dance around till the rabbit got quite dizzy.
I don't like dancing,
he said. I'd rather be still. But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new tickly feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the Velveteen's ear, and then winked his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped back. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real."
I am real,
said the little rabbit.
I am real. The boy said so.
Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two rabbits disappeared.
"Come back and play with me," he called. "Oh, do come back. I am real. I know I am."
But there was no answer. Only the little ants that ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had been. The Velveteen rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower, and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby. But the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved off all of his whiskers. And the pink lining in his ears turned gray, and the brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful. And that was all the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then one day, the boy became ill. His face was very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the little rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and all through it, the little Velveteen rabbit lay there, hidden from sight underneath the bedclothes, and never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play. And the little rabbit found it rather dull, with nothing to do all day. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. all sorts of delightful things he had planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at the picture books, and while the little rabbit cuddled close to his side. And one day they let him get up and get dressed. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the window stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes with his head just peeking out and listening. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and the toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burned. "Hooray!" thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside." For the boy has often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "That?" said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old pictures and books and lots of rubbish and carried out to the end of the garden behind the outhouse. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had potatoes to dig and green peas to gather, but the next morning he promised to come by quite early and burn the whole lot. That night, the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with. It was a splendid new bunny, all white and plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in and itself was a wonderful thing that he could not think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old pictures and books in the corner of the outhouse, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, so there was enough of an opening that he could get through. He was shivering a little bit, for he had been used to sleeping in a bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer protection for him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone days. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the woods when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a real tear, trickled down his shabby little velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the garden, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had a slender green leaf the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seems to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out and the children don't need them anymore, I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," said the fairy, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone else." And she held the little rabbit close to her in her arms and flew with him into the woods. Now comes the fun part. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. When they saw the fairy, they stopped dancing, and they stood around in a ring and stared at her. "I brought you a new plaything," said the fairy. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all the things he needs to know about Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit just sat there quietly for a moment and never moved. For when he saw all the rabbits dancing around him, he was suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him the last time, that she had changed him altogether, and he might have sat there for a long time, too shy to move. Just then, something had tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind legs to scratch his toe, to scratch his nose with his toe. There, I got it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed against the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look at the fairy, she was gone. Autumn passed and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the woods behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from under the bracken. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur. He had been spotted, but the spots didn't seem to show through. And about his soft little nose there was a round black eyes. Something was familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that I lost when I had scarlet fever." but he never knew that it was really his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. And that's the Velveteen Rabbit.